What would you do after winning the World Championship match? I can imagine a lot of people. They will go to a tropical island, enjoy the beautiful weather, have a drink, go to a party, or do something nice at least. But I don't think I would be playing a tournament myself after 3 weeks of intense play, facing the same opponent, and also don't forget all these months of preparation both Nepo and Ding had. But instead, Ding Liren is 1 week after the match finished, he is back at the board again. The world champion is playing in Bucharest in the Grand Chess Tour. It's the first leg of a series of amazing events. And in the first event in Bucharest, it's a classical time control. It's a round robin event. And we see the 10 best players in the world competing with each other. Apart from Magnus Carlsen. He is not there, but he will join the tour later. In the first 2 rounds, we have seen quite a number of interesting games. But I would like to focus at a very interesting match between Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. They are playing each other again, only 1 week after they returned from Kazakhstan. They are back at the board facing each other. And Nepomniachtchi is having the white pieces. Let's have a look at that game. In the match, he played the move 1e4, but for this occasion, he goes back to 1d4, which he actually played only once in the match against Ding. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5. It's the Queen's Gambit declined. C takes pawn, e takes d5, and now bishop g5. This has all been seen many times. And after e3, it's actually Ding who's the first one to deviate from their match. In game 3 of the match, Ding played here the move h6, which is a very respectable move. The other move, which he's playing in the game, it's the other main line. He brings out the bishop to f5. It's a nice square for the bishop, and ideally, we are going to see the exchange of bishops, and black will be very satisfied trading off the light squared bishops, as he has a pawn structure when the pawns are fixed on light squares. But the most ambitious move here for white is the move queen f3, attacking the bishop straight away. The bishop goes back to g6, and now white's idea is to take on f6 and ruining black's pawn structure on the king side. This is a very well-known line, and it's a very interesting clash in which white has a healthier pawn structure. Look, these pawns are isolated, they are doubled, they are not very nice, but still black's position is still quite solid, and as compensation he does have the pair of bishops. White continues here with the move knight f3. This has still been seen hundreds of times, very thematical way of playing, and now Ding has a small surprise in store, because the main move here is to continue developing with knight bd7, but instead he plays here the move a5. Very interesting idea, trying to grab some space, and who knows, let's see how far the pawn can get, and tries to undermine the pawn on b2. Maybe bishop b4 can be played very soon. Black is looking for some active play on that side of the board. But white plays here the move knight h4, which is also an interesting idea. Not with the idea to take the bishop, because that will improve black's pawn structure again, but it's more that you would like to try to gain control over the f5 square. So a typical plan for white in this case would be to put a king on d2. You're not interested in castling. There's no need to do so when the queens are off the board. Next step will be bishop d3, and then later on that knight is looking for a nice time on the f5 square. Ding continues with its plan with the move a4, and I'm pretty sure his idea is to undermine the knight on c3 by tickling the pawn on b2. So white goes a3, and I believe that here Ding kind of messed up his preparation, as he played here the move knight bd7. Very interesting move, but probably it's more precise here to play the move bishop e7. Because white's plan here, not only to gain control over the f5 square, is trying to trap the bishop with the move f4, followed by f5. And the bishop is in deep trouble. But with the bishop on e7, black still has the move f5, and the bishop is attacking the knight on h4. The knight will have to return, And now black is able to complete development. If you look at the position, this bishop on g6 looks kind of bad. It's not doing that much, but white doesn't have any good pawn break. So black is very solid, and it could very well be this is some sort of a fortress. But let's have a look at the difference with the move Ding played. He played here the move knight e7, and white played the move f4. Very interesting idea. Just to show you that black cannot ignore the threat, because if you move the bishop to e7 now, white's going to play f5, and after the bishop will go to h5, it's the only available square, white goes h3, and nothing can be done against the threat of g4 when the bishop is just trapped. So is black still able to play here the move f5? It's a way to avoid the immediate loss of the bishop, but the problem is that compared with the other line, the bishop doesn't attack the knight on h4, and rather than moving the knight back, white can play its bishop to d3, and on the next move, white is going to win the pawn. Therefore, Ding felt he's a bit in trouble here. He need to find a way out, and he decided to move its bishop far away from the white pawns, moving it to c2, hoping that the bishop could be doing pretty well on b3. But white goes rook c1, attacking the bishop, and the bishop comes to b3. And it may seem as black is in reasonable shape here. His idea could be to play knight b6, followed by bishop c4, and try to gain control over the c4 square, which could be a nice outpost for the knight if once you exchange the light squared bishops. But now Nepo comes up with a brilliant move. Look what he plays here. Rather than developing the bishop to d3, which is a very human move, he plays here the move knight back to b1. So he's dropping back with a developed piece to its initial square. And the knight has a very simple plan of coming to d2 to undermine the bishop on b3. So for instance, if black continues with knight b6, we go knight e2. Attacking the bishop, you're controlling the c4 square. So both the rook, knight and bishop, they're preventing the black bishop from coming to c4. The bishop could still go away to a2. But now after bishop d3, moving the king to e2, something like rook c3, rook a1, it's very unlikely that black can still avoid the loss of material. This looks very dangerous. And I think Ding realized that he did something wrong. And over his next move, he spent at least 35 minutes, which is a huge amount of time. And then eventually he came up with this move, rook a5. Of course, it's a typical idea once you have brought up your rook's pawn that the rook can be developed in such a way, but it's not entirely clear to me what the rook is going to do there. White played here the move bishop e2. It's also possible to play knight e2 in fact, but bishop e2 is a reasonable move, and now the plan of black has been revealed. He's trying to look for active counterplay with the move c5. Remarkable idea, because this is something you normally don't want to do in the queen's gambit. You have already pawn weaknesses on the king side, and by playing the move c5, white has the possibility of taking on c5 and create another isolated pawn. And imagine that white has the chance here to play king f2, get the other rook into play as well. I think only white can be better here. So this would have been a simple way of playing. But instead of capturing, Nepo played here the move knight to f5, which is a beautiful square for the knight, of course, and it can no longer be challenged by black's light squared bishop. One of the main points is, of course, that black cannot take the pawn on d4 as it runs into rook c8 with checkmate. Of course, Ding, the world champion, is not going to fall for such cheapos and instead decides to move the knight to b6. Well, interesting moment, because I believe that white should just have tried to continue bringing all its pieces into the game. And the most sensible way of doing so is king f2 in my opinion. Once again, there's no need to castle, just to connect the rooks. And very soon, after black is going to play something like c4, I'm very happy to bring my knight to c3. White is definitely better here. The queen side is closed, and by placing the bishop on f3, we can target the pawn. We have ideas to expand on the king side as well. And look at black's pieces. They are standing everywhere, but there's no nice way they are cooperating together. So let's see what happened instead. Instead of king f2, there followed the move knight to d2. But after the move c4, this knight is actually not doing that well, and well, Nepo thought, let's go back with the knight to b1, as the knight is much better placed on c3. So it's a nice positional provocation, but I think there was no need to waste time on this knight maneuver. The knight is positionally speaking much better placed on c3, but okay, it took white 2 moves to accomplish that. The main idea is that look at black's pieces. They are also looking kind of weird. But the next move of Ding is fantastic positional understanding by the world champion. He realizes that the knight on b6 is totally misplaced, standing in the way of the b pawn. And black would love to get in the b pawn to b5 and then later to b4 to generate counterplay. So his next move, knight a8. The knight goes back into the corner, and black is basically imitating white's idea here of making these these backward knight moves. But this is beautiful positional chess. The knight is on its way to c7. Knight c3, and now knight c7. The knight protects the pawn, white goes king f2, and there is the move b5. Black is back in the game. One of the ideas is that if you play too slow, let's say move like bishop f3 to attack the pawn on d5 twice, well, there is b4, and the rook covers the pawn along the 5th rank. After a b4, bishop takes b4, black is going to take over the initiative. It's going to put its king in the center, get the rook over to b8, and start pressurizing the pawn on b2, potentially even play the move a3. This is very dangerous. And therefore, Nepo felt the urgency. He needs to do something and decides to break in the center with the move e4. Black plays the move b4 anyway. A b4, bishop b4, putting pressure on the knight, threatening to take, and maybe to take the pawn on e4 as well. So white takes on d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5. And here we have another critical moment, because in the game, there followed the move rook takes d5. But the move you would actually love to play here as black is the move bishop d2, attacking the rook, forcing the rook to go to an inferior square, as it seems. But there is an incredible tactical resource here, which I wanted to show you. Rather than moving the rook away to a random square where it cannot be captured, there is this move, rook takes c4. Brilliant idea, with the main point being that after black captures the rook, there is knight d6 check. And after the king moves away, we have knight takes c4. And it's another knight fork as the knight hits both the rook and the bishop, which means that white will have at least 2 minor pieces for the rook with a technically winning position. So that is a nice tactical idea. And black cannot play bishop d2 at the moment, but what he can do instead is start here with the move king d7. It's a very good positional move, bringing the king into the game. The rook is also about to join. And one very important tactical point is that bishop takes c4 can actually be met by the move bishop to d2. And all of a sudden, this rook on c1 has problems keeping control over the bishop on c4. If the rook moves away, black is going to take the bishop. So the only move would be bishop takes b3, bishop takes c1. You can even capture one more pawn with check. Black is going to take on a4, rook takes c1. Very unusual material balance of a knight and 3 pawns versus a rook. But the white pawns, they are not very impressive, so they can be picked up very soon as well. This is probably a more or less equal position. But instead, Ding didn't play this move. He instead played here the move rook takes d5. Very understandable, attacking the knight on f5. And strangely enough, there followed the move bishop takes c4, aiming for huge simplifications, which is still very interesting. But if you would have played here the move g4, supporting the knight maintains control over the pawn on d4. White is still about to capture on c4 next. The critical line, though, is that there is bishop to d2, attacking the rook, trying to force the rook to leave the attack on the pawn on c4, but there's bishop takes c4, key move. If you take the rook, I'm going to take your rook. Bishop takes c1, bishop takes d5. If you would take the bishop with the bishop on f4, it's bishop takes b3, a takes b3, king f3, attacking the bishop. White has an overwhelming advantage in this endgame. The rook is coming over very soon. Passed pawn, better pawn structure. This is technically winning. Instead of bishop takes pawn, there is still bishop takes d5 as well. But then after rook takes c1, white is a very healthy pawn up and can very soon try to activate its rook to c5. This is what Nepo should have done. Instead he played bishop takes c4, with the point of course that if you do take on c4, rook takes c4, black has no time to take on f5. Not because we are going to take the bishop, but there's rook c8, and thanks to a skewer, white is going to be an exchange up. Instead there followed rook takes f5, and now white takes on b3 with the same idea. If you do take on b3, it's rook c8 with the skewer, winning material. But instead, black has the move castling kingside. Excellent idea. And well, we have a rook endgame with opposite colored bishops, and white's pawns, they're also not very great. So seems to me that white is a bit better, but black has very good drawing chances. And that's what actually was shown in the game. White played here the move rook c4, counterattacking black's bishop. And now, okay, there's this possibility to take the bishop and you take on b4. Black is going to take here the pawn. This kind of endgame should definitely be a bit better for white. But after, let's say, rook g4, attacking the pawn, white goes g3, rook e8 check, king d3, rook e4. The rooks are connected, and with two rooks, there's always a lot of counterplay and very good drawing chances. Instead, Ding decided to take first the pawn on f4 with check. The king goes away to e3, and now, very interesting in-between move. The rook is also hanging, bishop is hanging. We play the move bishop d2, so the king got to take the bishop. A takes b3, and we have this rook endgame in which material's even. Black is actually threatening rook f2, trying to collect the pawns on the second rank. But white goes rook e1, so that he can always meet rook f2 with rook e2. Rook d8, attacking the pawn. Now king d3. White's rooks are more active. The pawn on d4 is definitely an asset, but it's still very difficult to make progress. In the game there followed f5. Black is also looking for counterplay. And here I believe the critical move for white, basically the only chance here still, something like rook d1, with the idea to bring the king over to c3. The problem is that if you play king c3 immediately, there is this move rook f2, and there's counterplay along the second rank. But when you start with the move rook d1, and once you play the move king c3, you always have rook d2 as a possibility. And there are still practical chances. Instead, white played the move rook b4, but there followed h5. And the problem is that you cannot take the pawn on b3. If rook takes pawn, it's rook takes pawn on d4. So the rook got to stay on the fourth rank to defend the pawn on d4. Rook e2, and black goes h4. This is the counterplay you're looking for. If white continues with its plan, there is h3, g takes h3, rook f3, a lot of counterplay, and all of a sudden black even has managed to create a passed pawn. Therefore, white played h3 himself, king g7, king c3, and now rook e4. Excellent move. Black would love to undouble the pawns, even if that would mean that you're losing the pawn on b3, because the main point is that you're going to play the move f5. You have connected passed pawns, and after that there's king f6. The king is standing nicely in the center. The rook can come over to the g file and attack the pawn on g2. White has to be even careful here. So instead of capturing the rook on e4 followed by capturing the pawn, Nepo changed his mind, went back with the king to d3, but of course that cannot lead anywhere. After rook takes rook, we have a single rook endgame, and the black king joins the party as well. Still, if rook takes b3 is rook takes d4 with a drawish endgame. The king cannot really come back to the center, because that would allow the move rook to g8, attacking the pawn on g2, and then all of a sudden black has a lot of counterplay with the f-pawn, and the h-pawn can be attacked soon as well. Therefore the white king went back to f3, but there's rook g8 anyway. And once again, if you do take the pawn on b3, there's a problem. This time it's a black rook who can give a skewer against the king and rook, so that would be an awful blunder. Instead, rook b6 played, king e7 back, and now white, since Rook G3 is coming very soon. The Rook is very active. The only way to try something is King F4, but then there is Rook takes G2. Attacking the pawn on B2, you don't want to lose that pawn because black will get a very strong passer. So there followed Rook takes B3, but you see that more and more pawns are getting exchanged, and this is leading to a drawish endgame. The players, they made a few more moves, but more and more pawns got exchanged. Even at this point, black is a pawn up. Not for long, the pawns are simply too weak, and very soon the remaining pawns got exchanged as well. First the rooks came off the board, and then black lost its remaining pawn. And very typically for these two players, what we have seen in Kazakhstan repeated in the third round in the Bucharest tournament as well. They are fighting till the bitter end. It's like king versus king. This is the fighting kind of draws we would love to see. I hope you enjoyed this game, and think again, what would you do if you would become world champion? I would not play a tournament myself. I love to play tournaments, but definitely I would take a break and enjoy life in a different way. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon back on the channel. Bye bye.